He was 14 years old, and he was painting peach trees white in the middle of winter, while the whole county drove past and laughed. And every single one of those men had been losing trees to the same problem for 30 years without understanding what it was. The question is not whether Marcus Mabberry was right. The question is why it took a boy to say so. It was Put Aldridge who said it first, which gave everyone else permission. He said it at the feed counter on a Thursday morning in November, said it to Vernon Crabtree and two men whose names Marcus would never learn. Said it easy and offhand, the way you say something you've already decided so many times it no longer needs thought. You know Calvin Mabberry's boy is out there every morning walking those rows like he's the county agent. 14 years old, little notebook, running his hands up and down the bark like a blind man reading something. He shook his head once, conclusive. Lord, I feel for Evelyn. The men at the counter responded the way men do when the joke already knows where it's going. A short laugh, a head shake, one man setting down his coffee with the comfortable certainty of a picture that makes sense. A widow barely holding on. A boy too young and too green to be trusted with what his father built. They did not ask whether the boy had found anything. 3 miles south, Marcus Mabberry was not thinking about the feed counter. He was standing in the second row of his father's peach orchard in the cold November light, and he had been standing there for 15 minutes, and the notebook was already out and open, and he had not yet written anything because he was still looking. This was his discipline. His father had taught it to him when he was 9, crouched in this same row. You write down what you see, not what you think you see. The difference is the whole job. What he was looking at was the bark on the southwest face of a 7-year-old Alberta, bark that should have been smooth and uniform but was instead cracked and sunken on that single face, the tissue beneath it dead, the wound weeping at the edges. He pressed his thumb to it, reading the texture. Then he stepped 3 trees down and checked the same face on the next tree. Same wound, same location. He went down 4 more trees, and the pattern held. When damage appeared, it appeared on the southwest face. Not north, not east, always southwest. He wrote, No 4, row 2, tree 6, 9, 14, 17. Wound location, face only. No damage on in or E face of same trees. He had been writing variations of this entry for 2 years, since the week after his father's funeral, when he understood that the farm was his to figure out now. The notebook had a cracked spine from being carried in his back pocket every morning. Inside, in his careful hand, were 22 months of dated observations, bark temperatures, damage locations, which rows lost trees and which did not, the specific geography of every wound. The memory arrived the way his father's memories always did, without announcement. Calvin Mabberry crouched beside him in this same row, pointing at the bark of a young tree. Run your hand around the whole trunk. Feel where it's warm and where it's cold. The tree is telling you something. Your job is to listen. Marcus, 9 years old, pressing both palms against the bark, feeling the difference in temperature between the south face and the north, not understanding what it meant, but understanding that it meant something, and that he was being trusted to find out what. His father had believed in him. The county did not. Raymond Ogle stopped his truck on the county road that morning and called out, Son, what exactly are you doing? Documenting bark damage patterns, Marcus said. Raymond looked at the notebook. Who told you to do that? No one, Marcus said. The pattern's there. Raymond looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man deciding whether he was watching dedication or damage, then rolled his window up and drove on. The real weight came on a Friday afternoon when Marcus was moving soil amendments in the barn and Put Aldridge came through with Vernon Crabtree to look at a tractor. They did not see him in the back. They did not look. Put said, Evelyn's holding this place together with prayers and a boy. That boy's been out here all fall playing scientist, Vernon said. How long does she think a widow and a 14-year-old can hold 40 acres in this county? Put said, she gets a real offer. She ought to take it, before the boy runs it to nothing trying to prove something nobody asked him to prove. They went to look at the tractor. Marcus stood still in the barn until he heard the truck leave. Then he stood alone for a while. He did not cry. He went back to the rows. That evening, he wrote at the bottom of the day's entry, They've already decided. The only answer is the evidence. He underlined evidence and went to bed and rose before light. If you just watched a boy get talked about in his own barn like he wasn't standing right there, stay with this because what he does next is the part nobody in that county saw coming. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. The kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night was where Marcus was teaching himself what school was not teaching him. Extension bulletins spread flat under the lamp, pages dense with technical language that he read with his finger moving under the words, his pencil writing questions in every margin. What is cambium? What does diurnal temperature fluctuation mean? Why does it matter which direction a row faces? He was 14. And he was doing this alone, and he knew that being alone in it was both his greatest problem and his only advantage. No one was going to teach him the wrong answer first. He found the word sun's called 3 weeks into his nighttime research, and when he read the definition, his hands stopped moving. Sun's called tissue damage occurring on the southwest face of young fruit trees during winter, caused by the solar heating of bark tissue on warm afternoons followed by rapid temperature drop after sunset. The heated cambium emerges from dormancy prematurely, then is killed when overnight temperatures fall below freezing. Damage is characteristically limited to the southwest face. He read it 4 times. He looked at his notebook. Every wound he had documented across 2 years, southwest face. The bulletin had just given his pattern a name, but a name was not enough. The county would not care what a boy read in a bulletin at midnight. He needed someone with credentials to confirm it, someone the county would have, to take seriously, even if they refused to take him seriously. He needed a letter from a university man. The letter took 3 drafts. The first tried too hard to explain why he had a right to ask. He threw it out. The second was too short. The third was right, organized, specific, precise. He described the orchard, the damage pattern, the 2 years of document observations, his hypothesis. He signed it. Marcus James Mabberry. Mabberry Farm, Crawford County, established by Calvin Mabberry, 1979. He walked to the mailbox at the end of the lane and raised the flag and stood in the November cold and told himself not to expect anything back. He checked the mailbox every afternoon for 6 weeks. The envelope came on a Thursday in December with a university seal in the corner, and he opened it standing at the mailbox and read it right there. Dear Marcus, your diagnosis is correct. What you have described and documented is a textbook case of sun's called in Prunus persica, and your 2 years of systematic observation are more rigorous than most commercial growers manage in a lifetime. Here is what you do about it. The solution was simple enough to be possible and not so obvious as to be common. White latex paint on the trunk, diluted half with water for young trees whose thin bark needed to breathe, full strength on mature trunks, applied with care to the southwest face. The white surface would reflect solar radiation instead of absorbing it, keeping the bark temperature stable, keeping the tissue asleep through winter until the danger of hard frost had genuinely passed. He read the letter 6 times that evening. The phone call came on a Saturday, arranged by postcard. He stood in the front hall with the receiver against his ear and the notebook open on his knee. Dr. Ambrose Teague at the State Agricultural College spoke to him like the long-distance charge was worth every cent. How old are the trunks? Which direction do your rows run? What's the bark thickness on the oldest trees? Marcus answered each question from the notebook, and each answer was met with specific building follow-up, the way a man talks when he is working from real data rather than filling in blanks. Already decided. When Marcus identified that the young trees in the south row were at greatest risk because their bark was thinnest, the doctor said plainly, "You're reading your orchard better than men twice your age." Near the end of the call, "Don't let anybody talk you out of your own 2 eyes, Marcus. Your eyes have been doing the right work." Marcus the phone and stood in the hall. He had been seen. He had been believed. A man with letters behind his name had looked at what he was looking at and said, "Yes, that is real." He bought 6 gallons of white latex at the hardware store in town. The man at the counter asked what he needed it for. Marcus said, "The orchard." The man opened his mouth and Marcus paid and left. He started painting on a Wednesday in the cold early light, working the brush in slow overlapping strokes up from the base of each trunk, watching white go on over rough dark bark. He did not rush. He did not perform it for anyone watching from the road. Cars slowed. Trucks stopped briefly. Curtis Hayward, who had done odd work on the Mabberry place under Calvin, helped for 4 mornings and then stopped, unable to reconcile what he was watching with any picture he carried of what right work looked like. Dale Simpkins, the county extension agent, came on a Friday and walked the rows with his clipboard and said, "Who told you to paint the bark?" "Dr. Ambrose Teague at the college," Marcus said. He confirmed the diagnosis. The white surface prevents the cambium from waking during afternoon solar heating. Dale looked at the trunks. He wrote something that was not about the Mabberry orchard and walked back to his truck. Marcus's mother watched all of it and said, at dinner one evening, "You don't have to prove anything to these men." "I'm not doing it for them," Marcus said. "I need to know if I'm right." She looked at him, the look of a woman who has bet everything on a single judgment and is watching it move through the world. Then she got up and cleared the plates. The next morning he was in the rows before the light was full, white paint on dark bark, the county road quiet and the orchard quiet and the work the only thing that mattered. The first spring came right, and he let himself feel it but not say it. The painted trunks crowned in blossoms the first week of April, white bark below, white flowers above. the whole orchard looking like something unusual, which made people slow their cars on the county road for a different reason than before. The fruit sat heavy and clean. The packer from Fort Valley who came in September walked the rows and said unprompted, "This is the best fruit off this place since your daddy was running it." He paid without negotiating. A college bulletin that fall noted a 12-acre operation in Crawford County that had cut winter losses to near zero with unconventional dormancy methods. Everybody in Byron knew which 12 acres it meant. Evelyn Mabberry allowed herself, for the first time since Calvin died, to believe they might keep the farm. Marcus wrote in his notebook, "First clean winter after treatment. No new damage on painted trunks. Control tree in row 6 showing characteristics W damage confirms treatment is causal, not coincidental." Then, on the next line, "One good season proves nothing. It could be the paint, it could be weather. The real test is the winter still coming." He understood that a single harvest was not evidence of a solution. It was a data point. The solution needed to hold under pressure, and pressure had not arrived yet. It arrived in December. The warm spell came in quietly, high 40s through Christmas and into January, the kind of winter that doesn't announce itself until you understand what it's setting up. Marcus felt the wrongness before he could name it. The orchard too soft, the air carrying a faint green smell that had no business being there in January. He walked the rows on the second day of the new year and found it. Buds on the young trees in the south row had begun to swell. The cambium, fooled by 3 weeks of warmth, was waking up. He walked every row, checked every tree. Then he came inside and sat at the kitchen table and worked through the logic with the notebook open. The paint reflected afternoon radiation and kept the bark stable on normal winter days. But it could not prevent the cambium from waking when the air temperature itself stayed above 40 for 3 weeks. And the forecast that morning promised a front dropping to 10 below by the weekend. Awake tissue and 10 below. He had painted the trees against the sun. He had not accounted for a false spring. He stood on the porch that Friday evening looking at the rows of white trunks he had painted with such care, and for the first time in 2 years he was afraid. Not of the county's judgment. Afraid of being wrong in why the orchard would not survive. He checked the trees every morning as the cold arrived. First morning, bark firm. Second morning, firm. Third morning, 2 soft patches on young trees in the south row. Tissue beneath gone soft under his thumb. He wrote it down and told himself 2 out of 200 was a wound he could survive and did not sleep. The fourth morning he found tree 47. Tree 47 was the Alberta his father had planted the first year of the orchard. The oldest tree on the place, the one with its photograph taped inside the notebook cover. The damage was low on the southwest face, the bark soft under his thumb. He stood in the killing cold with his bare hand flat against that trunk for a long time. He did not reach for the notebook. He just held his hand against the bark of his father's tree. When he finally wrote, the entry was short. The paint held against the sun. It could not hold against cold-reaching wood that was already awake. I solved half the problem and called it whole. His mother found him at the kitchen table that evening and said, "Your father would not have wanted you to freeze yourself half to death over trees." Marcus said, "Dad lost 11 trees because he didn't go out in the cold and look at why. I'm not losing the rest because I wouldn't either." She put her hand on his shoulder and had no answer to that. He ordered burlap from the supply house in Macon and spent 3 weeks wrapping the lower trunk of every tree, before and after school, his hands going white and stiff each evening. A man hauling feed past on the county road slowed his truck and stared at the boy on his knees in 10-degree cold winding burlap around tree after tree like he was dressing wounds. The diner got the story. The Mabberry boy had painted the trunks and now he was bandaging them. Folks said the boy had lost his mind. Marcus heard it secondhand and let it go. But alone at midnight with hands too stiff to hold a pencil, he let himself think what he hadn't said out loud. Maybe they're right. Maybe a boy has no business betting his father's trees on a letter and a hunch. He sat with that for a long time. Then he thought about 22 months of southwest face damage, row by row, tree by tree. Always the same face, always the same pattern. He had not imagined it. The seeing was real even when the saving was not yet finished. He went to bed. He rose before light. He went back to the trees. Tree 47 leafed out thin the following spring and set no fruit. Marcus watched it through June and into July, the bark splitting along the branches, the death slow and visible. In August, he carried the chainsaw to the third row and stood in front of his father's tree for a long while before he pulled the cord. The cut was clean and quick. He shut the saw off and stood over the stump for the longest time. Old Curtis Hayward was passing through the east fence, saw it, understood that some things a man does alone, and kept walking. That night, Marcus took the photograph off the notebook cover, tree 47, the big Alberta. his father standing beside it the spring he planted it. He held it over the trash can, then stopped, taped it back where it was. The tree had taught him the most important thing the orchard had to teach. Being half right was its own kind of wrong. He would keep the photograph not as a monument to failure, but as a permanent instruction about incompleteness. The rest of the orchard came through. The burlap-wrapped trunks held. The 7 scarred trees the extension agent had wanted cut and burned pushed out vigorous new growth in April. The tight green kind that means a tree is taking back ground. Marcus documented everyone. 3 summers passed. By the 3rd summer, the Mabberry orchard was producing what it had always been capable of. Fruit heavy and clean across every row. The Fort Valley packer moving it to a premium tier without being asked. A college bulletin described a 12-acre operation in Crawford County that had reduced winter losses to near zero through reflective latex and trunk insulation. Named only by county and acreage. Everybody in Byron knew the place. Vernon Aldridge drove up the lane on a Thursday afternoon during harvest. Vernon was the biggest peach grower in Crawford County, 400 acres, premium contracts. The man who had told 3 separate people at the diner that painting bark white was the most foolish thing he had heard of a boy doing to a good orchard. He parked at the end of the row and stood watching Marcus, 17 now, a young man nearly, broad from 3 years of orchard work, moving down a ladder with a canvas bag and pouring the fruit gentle into the crate below. Vernon waited until the moment was right. Then he said, "Is it the brand or does that part not matter?" Marcus came down off the ladder and told him plain, the way Dr. Teague had once told him, any white latex will do it. Cut it half with water the first year while the bark's young. Full strength after that. Southwest face needs the most attention. That's where the heating happens. Vernon reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small notebook. The same kind Marcus had been carrying in his back pocket for 3 years. The same kind the whole county had laughed at a boy for carrying around a peach orchard. He wrote down what Marcus said. A grown man, the biggest grower in the county, taking notes from a boy he had called simple to the entire diner. When he was done, he looked at the rows of white trunks stretching the length of the orchard and said, "Your daddy would have been proud of this fruit." He put his hat on and drove down the lane. Marcus watched the truck until it turned onto the county road. He had not been waiting on an apology. He had been waiting on the fruit to come off clean and heavy. It did, row by row, all the way to the end of the day. That was the summer the laughing stopped. Nobody stood up at the diner and said they'd been wrong. The proof was hanging on 210 white trunks, doing exactly what a 14-year-old boy had said they would do. A man only has to drive past a thing like that so many times before he quits laughing and starts counting his own dead trees against the price of a can of paint. The county changed the way counties change. Without announcement, without attribution, the feed store began stocking white latex near the orchard supplies. Dale Simpkins presented at the annual growers meeting on reflective bark, treatment in preventing diurnal temperature damage, presented it as established knowledge. Marcus was not in that room. He was in his first year of university, studying horticulture, calling home on Sundays. His mother kept the photograph of tree 47 on the kitchen wall and told a woman from the County Historical Society, 20 years later, that the most valuable thing on the Mabberry place was a box of notebooks tied with twine. Not because they were always right. Half the entries recorded Marcus being wrong. 11 trees lost before he understood the half he'd missed. Tree 47 with the date of its death in his own hand. What made them worth keeping was that not one wrong entry stood alone. Every wrong decision had a correction written underneath it. That, she said, was the only thing that ever taught a person to keep a living thing alive. The county spent one winter laughing at a boy painting trees white in the cold. It spent the next 40 years painting its own trees white. And not one of those men ever said his name while he did it. The vindication was complete, not because he was celebrated, but because the county quietly became exactly what he had always been. People who looked carefully at what was killing their trees and did something about it. He was not smarter than the men who laughed at him. He had one thing they did not. He was willing to look at the problem honestly, even when the answer made him look foolish, even when the whole county had already decided a boy like him could not possibly be the one who was right. The real victory was not proving them wrong. It was proving himself right in the face of a judgment made before he ever opened his mouth, and then having the discipline to keep proving it, winter after winter, until the evidence became undeniable. Somewhere in the county right now, there is probably a person everybody has already written off. Too young, too quiet, too far outside the room where decisions get made. Every so often, that is the exact person who sees the thing everyone else is too proud to look at. Marcus Mabberry was that person. He had a notebook, a pattern, and his father's voice telling him to write down what he saw. He did. The seeing was real, even when the saving wasn't finished. Keep going. From the Mabberry Farm Orchard Notebook, C.K. Marcus Mabberry, age 15.